Yes. Good afternoon, and welcome to yet another extremely topical and extremely timely AMET webinar. As many of you know, AMET is a premier Washington, D.C. think tank and policy shop. Our nation's policymakers have grown to rely upon us and to trust us to offer timely, accurate, nonpartisan education about the Middle East on Capitol Hill. Our efforts have made a difference. Looking back, we know that we have made impactful changes to help create a more secure future for the United States and for the State of Israel. We get no government grants, and we rely entirely on viewers such as yourselves to help keep us afloat. Before we begin, we'd like to ask you to please consider making a tax-deductible donation to AMET at www.ametonline.org. Anne Frank had once famously written, "What one Jew does reflects on all Jews." I found myself reflecting upon that quote a great deal this week in regards to the recent GCC summit in Saudi Arabia. A great deal of hope and a tremendous amount of quiet behind the scenes work, far from the public purview, has gone into the delicate fabric of potential normalization between the State of Israel and Saudi Arabia. During President Biden's recent trip to Jeddah earlier this month, the Saudis were gracious enough to permit a group of Israeli journalists to enter the country. One particular Israeli journalist, Gil Tamari, decided to take it upon himself to enter Mecca, film what he saw there, and then broadcast it to the entire world. This incident by one lone individual might potentially have soured the delicate flowering of relations between Saudi Arabia and the State of Israel. In Western eyes, this doesn't seem like such a tremendous transgression. Yet, this act by one lone Israeli might have undone years and years of quiet under-the-table diplomacy. Why is it so difficult for those of us from Western democracies to understand the cultural, societal, and theological contexts of other cultures? What is it about Islam that we fail to understand? Or from the eyes of the Muslim world, in the words of the late, great Bernard Lewis, Harold Rhodes' mentor, what went wrong? Here to help answer these questions and more is Harold Rhodes. Harold Rhodes is a distinguished senior fellow at the Gatestone Institute. He received a PhD in Ottoman Islamic Studies from Columbia University and later served as the Turkish desk officer at the U.S. Department of Defense. Harold Rhodes has taught Islamic history at the University of Delaware as an adjunct professor from 1979 until 1981. In May 1982, he joined the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense for Policy at the Pentagon as an advisor on the Islamic world with a special emphasis on Turkey, Iran, and Iraq. He retired from this position in 2010. During his tenure, he wrote papers on how to understand, negotiate, and deal with Turkey, Iran, Central Asia, and other Arab countries. Harold Rhodes has studied in and traveled extensively throughout the Islamic world, too much modesty, and has studied and done research in universities and libraries in Egypt, Israel, Syria, Jordan, Iran, Afghanistan, Turkey, Uzbekistan, and Kazakhstan. He speaks Arabic, Hebrew, Persian, French, and Turkish. And he's incredibly modest, as you can see. So without further ado, Harold, why is this such a tremendous transgression?
Well, for Muslims, the Quran is the word of God. You may even say it's more than that. If you compare it for Christians, it's like the body of Jesus. It's part of God. And so in the Quran, it basically makes clear that it says infidels, and it means basically in this thing, non-Muslims may not come into the holy city, may not come come into the holy mosque. Now, no human being, whether he's a religious authority or a political authority on earth, can change what God says. That's it. And so the Saudis, who are the guardians of Mecca and Medina, well, let's specifically deal with Mecca here. They can't let non-Muslims there. Now, there's no doubt throughout history that there are non-Muslims who've been there. They've basically been very quiet about it if they want to live afterwards, because they have, by doing that, by going there, they are defaming Islam. They are, this is, again, it's against God or Allah, whatever. He said that if that's what he says, then that's the way it is. Now, formerly what the Saudis do, there are signs on the road into Mecca where it says, for non-Muslims, you have to get off at this exit. And even in the video that Gil Tamari showed that he made, you see that sign, and that's off to the right, and he and the taxi cab driver are going straight. Now, from what I understand, this to make it even, shall we say, more complicated, the taxi driver was a Saudi citizen. Again, that's what I've read. I can't know for sure. No, Saudi citizens have to be Muslims. So what this poor guy has done, the taxi cab driver and Gil Tamari together, they both are going to suffer the consequences. Now, two things. What are the consequences and when? Muslims know in the Middle East, patience is an enormous virtue that we in the West could learn. We think of terms of we buy time, we spend time. It's all economic to us. And we don't care what happened, especially in the United States, what happened yesterday. Oh, that's history. That's yesterday's news. Who cares? But that's not how people understand things in the Middle East. If someone offends you, if someone shames you, humiliates you, that is a defamation of your personal honor. And you must avenge this. When? Well, since you can be patient, maybe the time isn't right. Maybe you don't open your mouth at the moment, because if you bring it up, you yourself, you're reminding everybody of the dishonor. Now, what happened here is, for the Israeli journalists having gone there, wow, and if you look at the video, it's like, look at me, look where I am. It's not only that he went, and again, as I say, there are many, I'm sure there are many Muslims, non-Muslims who've been in Mecca over the years. But if no one knows about it, that's between God and the person who did it, and let God take care of it. But once it's publicized and all that, since the Saudis are the protectors today, they weren't in the past, before the early 1920s. The Ottomans were, and then the family, the Hashemites who ruled Jordan today, they ruled Mecca for 1,000 years under various other rulers who formally, shall we say, but they ran it. So what we have here is that this has to be dealt with. Now, how the Muslims, how to deal with things. Now, there is a Saudi law that says you can be deported, you can be fined, you maybe even be jailed. But there is no central authority in Islam that decides, that can speak for the entire Muslim world. And if some lone wolf, if you wish to call him, or if someone else, God knows where in the world, decides, I am going to avenge the honor of God, I'll be God's appointee, if you to take care of this. They must avenge the honor. No, who can they do it against? Number one, Gil Tamari himself, the journalist, he may be safe in Israel, but if he travels to Europe, there are a lot of lone wolves, the Muslim Brotherhood, which is a vicious anti-Western, really non-Muslim organization. They're very active there. The Israeli journalist Tzvi Yechezkeli, I think he's on channel 12 or 13, whatever it is, on Israeli TV. It's one of the best that Israel has. He did a 4-part series going all over Europe, talking with Muslim Brotherhood and other people. And these people know they're going to take over all of Europe. Well, if Gil Tamari goes and travels there, he goes, well, how can he prevent his pictures all over the place? People will know what he looks like. Now, Gil Tamari also belongs to another group. It's called He's a Jew. Would people decide to take this out against the Jews? Because in the Middle East, honor also works in a way that I'm not Harold Road, but I'm Harold of Road. The road is what matters. So whatever I do brings honor or shame on my family, and then on my people, the Jews, or then on me as an American, whatever the case may be. So, but this must be avenged. Now, the Saudis have been rather silent on this, but what did they do? The driver, who Gil Tamari in his he did the right thing. He tried to blur the picture of the driver. Well, the Saudis have already arrested him. They found him and they arrest him. God knows what's going to happen to him. Not only him, but his family, because he's helped bring the shame here. And on the concept of knowing how to wait, I just want to say really one other thing here. And they will brood, bide their time, but I will not rest until I've accomplished revenge here. Look, let's just take one thing. Let's take the World Trade Towers 9/11 incident where they, Bin Laden and his cohorts destroyed that. They tried to destroy the Pentagon, and they had a plane. Thank God it was thwarted, which was supposed to hit the Capitol. And what Bin Laden gave this speech right afterwards, in which he talked about two things. Number one, he talked about an incident, something that happened 80 years ago. Since we in America, again, as I said before, it's history. Who cares? Whatever. What happened was, we didn't know what this was all about. So I remember some senior people in the American government asking me, Harold, what does it mean? So it took me a few seconds, but I know something about Islamic history. That's probably the thing I know most. And it's very clear. The Ataturk, who founded modern Turkey on the ruins of the Ottoman Empire, he and his cohorts they abolished the caliphate in Istanbul. That was 80 years beforehand, before 9/11. And the caliph was the Ottoman Sultan, one of his titles, and he ruled. He was the senior figure in the Muslim, and the Muslim was for Sunnis. For Shiites, it's not that way, but it's different. But remember, Sunnis are about 86-7%, whatever it is, of the Muslim world. And so that's one of the things he was avenging. Now, Ataturk and all, even though he fought all the Western powers, from a Muslim point of view, most people don't know the exact history. What they know is they believe they put him in power. And that's how the West, the non-Muslims, did this. And so the non-Muslims are responsible for Ataturk. And there are a lot of people in Turkey who believe that Ataturk is of Jewish origin. Whether in fact it's true, there are all sorts of rumors about everybody and everything. And then one other thing, and I'll stop there, Sarah, and you please, one other thing was the choice of 9/11. Why that date? Well, very interestingly, on September 11th in the year 1683, that's it's something like 300 plus years ago, whatever it is, the Ottomans, again, don't think of them as Turks, it's a Muslim empire. They were the banner of Islam. They had taken all of Southeastern Europe, and they, at the gates of Vienna, they were there twice. The first time for problems in Istanbul, they withdrew, came back to the capital. But in 1683, on September 11th, the Christian armies at Vienna defeated the Ottoman military and forced them to retreat. And the next centuries, until the end of World War I, are the Muslim retreat from all of Southeastern Europe. Now, that was a huge humiliation. Now, do I know what was in Osama bin Laden's date? I know that symbolism is extremely important in Islamic culture. And you say, well, it's a Christian date. Muslims don't have the same calendar. That may be true, but I'm going to use the Christian calendar against the Christians. Now, why are the Christians important? Why was Vienna? Vienna was one of the most important cities of Christianity, of Christian rule. It's that back then. Today, it's the Pope and the United States of America, because it's the strongest, at least it still is, God willing, and will remain that way, despite of some people's efforts to make it weak. So obviously you attack the center of those who opposed you. And that is what the context is of the Mecca incident. And I maybe later a bit more on how the Saudis might handle this.
Wonderful. So you spoke about collective retribution. So do you think that there is a way, do you think they might take it out on the state of Israel eventually, or it's up for grabs?
They've been pretty silent, the Saudis, on this. I would say that, see, the Israelis are not particularly good at patience, of waiting. It's something that Netanyahu understood with time. He understood it very well, that I'm not so sure that the people running Israel right now understand. Patience is extremely important in the Middle East, and the Saudis also know how to wait. They humiliated Biden, Biden called Mohammed bin Salman, what they call MBS, the crown prince and actual de facto rulers of Saudi Arabia, a ruler of Saudi Arabia. He held him personally responsible for killing Khashoggi in the Saudi consulate in Istanbul. Well, we have no smoking gun to prove it. Do I think that he might have given the order? Possibly, but I can't know that. And we don't have the evidence. But to call, to insult, to humiliate, which is what Biden did to the Saudi crown prince. Again, the Saudis talked about it, but not MBS. He did not. He refused. So he got he brooded, he bided his time, and boy, now when all of a sudden, when Biden went to Saudi Arabia, what did they do? Again, we're looking for words. It's not the words, it's the actions. What did the Saudis do? First of all, the president of the United States, the most important, the most powerful leader on the planet, comes to Saudi Arabia. A protocol would be among the Arabs, and certainly it's international protocol. The person who should have greeted him at his stature would be the head of the king of Saudi Arabia, who is infirm, who can't do it. So that would mean, in that instance, it should have been Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince. Well, what do? They sent, and I've seen conflicting reports on this, I don't know, either the governor of the province of Mecca, Jeddah, where the plane came, is in the province of Mecca. They sent the governor or the deputy governor. This is a humiliation. Second of all, everything that Biden wanted to accomplish there, he either failed or the Saudis pulled the rug from under him. What does that mean? Number one, Biden is desperate for oil. And the Saudis, very politely but firmly, said, I'm very sorry. And frankly, just as an aside here, the oil that we produce here in the United States from fracking and through the Keystone Pipeline, that oil is of a much better quality, doesn't require as much pollution when it gets refined as Saudi oil does. So if you really do care about the climate, then you obviously want to use American to cultivate, American oil. No, simply that was number one, oil. Number two, I already mentioned how it was greeted. And there are 3 or 4 other things that at the moment escape me, but in the 2 articles in JNS that, Sarah, if you'd like, please send around to whoever.
We'll send it around. Yeah, in terms of other things, in terms of normalization, joining the Abraham Accords.
Well, look, Ron Gummer, who certainly knows a lot more of what happened, the former Israeli ambassador to Washington, he himself said without Mohammed bin Salman, there couldn't have been these agreements. And if you look at the role of both Bahrain and the Emirates, the United Arab Emirates, the Saudis, they are sort of like the test. We'll see what it is. Now, look, the truth is that for Bahrain, for Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, again, thanks to the vision of Netanyahu, he said, look, these, we don't run for these things, for agreements, for peace agreements. What we do is, if Israel is economically, politically, and whether economically, technologically, militarily strong, they will want a relationship with us. And that's what he was working towards. Now, how this is going to affect now Saudi-Israel relations, that's for the Saudis to determine. I don't know what they're going to do. But in the long run, their relationship with Israel benefits them. They all share the same enemy, and it's the Iranian regime, and who wants to take them all. By the way, taking out Saudi Arabia for the Iranians is much more important than taking out Israel. And the reason for that is that this is part of the Shiite-Sunni fight, which has been going on since the death of their prophet Muhammad, which is in the year supposedly 631 AD CE, whatever. Too many letters. We got to watch out. We're using letters here. Well, I'm going to get in trouble for all these awful things I say. Anyway.
All right. So, Harold, many people have speculated that in order for the Emiratis and the Bahrainis and the Moroccans and the Sudanese to join the Abraham Accords, there had to be a wink and a nod under the table from the Saudis. What does this actually bode, or how does this bode rather, for future relations between the Emiratis and the Bahrainis and the other members of the Abraham Accords towards Israel?
Well, I think that they'll try to be as quiet. I think, again, I'm not privy to the conversations at the senior levels of their government. I think they'll do their best to sort of ignore this, but and they will have already figured out, because they're much smarter about how they do things than I am, that if it comes up, how to handle it. But it also gives them a watch out. Okay, we need the Israelis. We want to work with them. All this, but it also gives us pause that we gotta be careful with the Israelis. We don't love them. We don't hate them. It's purely we're doing this for our own interest. And the problem with Jews is that because given our history, we are oh, please love me, please love us, don't kill us. These people, they make it very clear they're not into the love. That is the people in the Gulf world. International relations are based on permanent, or rather interests. Interests can change. And as long as Israel is strong economically, technologically, militarily, they need Israel. Israel needs them. It's a marriage which is almost, if you wish, made in heaven. And let's hope that everything continues well. I don't personally, if someone puts a gun to my head and said you have one one sentence to answer, which I'm clearly not good at. The answer is, I think, including with the Saudis, we'll weather this whole thing. Somehow. Look, the Americans, this administration did its damnedest in the beginning to try to destroy the Abraham Accords. They didn't put it in so many words, but that's in essence what, and they failed. And the monkey wrench here couldn't in this case be the American government, but it seems like they might be learning a bit, but not much. Right. Anyway, sorry.
So I remember September 15th, 2020, that was one of my greatest moments, sitting on the White House lawn. And I think that the polls within the countries throughout the Gulf were very positive about the Abraham Accords. Unfortunately, David Pollack of the FICA Institute, the FICA Project at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, has recently come out with a survey that said only 20% of the people on the ground right now in the GCC countries and in the Muslim and Arab world support the Abraham Accords. Do you think this might have something to do with the Biden visit and the slap in the face, metaphorically, that the administration has given to the Saudis?
Could be. Look, I'm not a fan of polling in the Middle East, and I want to say why. Middle Easterners don't, it's not a Western democracy. People are afraid to talk against their leadership and to criticize it or even subtly do it because they can get in trouble. And so the result is it's very, very hard to know about what public opinion is. In the Gulf, they know very well how to handle this. They know how to bring people in. They know how to solve problems like that. They do it. It's not what we have. I remember that one of the most astute leaders that I've known there is I don't know him personally, but I've seen over and over again, is the foreign minister of the UAE. The man's a genius. There you can see on the net, he was at a conference. I didn't know who he was. This is way back when. And some nice blonde-haired, blue-eyed British lady is asking a question. The conference was in Arabic, but she asked in English. He all of a sudden goes into English and said, I'm going to answer this in English so you make no mistake. You get exactly what I'm saying. This translation is like kissing through a sheet. It's just not the real thing. So he talks about you in the West. You think you know the others and you know Islam better than we do. And you basically, and I'm now paraphrasing because I don't have the exact words, you do this at your peril and at our peril. And the bottom line is they talk about radicals and extremists. They don't talk about fundamentalists. Why? Because if you go against fundamentalism, well, fundamentalism means going back to the source. It means that you're going to try to change Islam. You're saying, oh, these people they know what they're doing. They're unbelievably sophisticated. So is this MBS, Mohammed bin Salman in Saudi Arabia. They'll work it out. I can't believe that it's going to rupture Israeli-Saudi relations, but maybe it's happening right at this moment. I don't know. What I know is that we got to take it slow, and what is going on under the surface is much, much deeper than anything than let's say that the formal diplomatic relations that between Saudi Arabia and Israel, for example, is like the cherry on top of the icing of the cake. But what is going on otherwise, I only know very little, and I know so little it's unbelievable, but I know the relationship is very strong.
Excellent. So now it's my supreme honor to turn this over to my wonderful colleague, Hussein Abubakar Mansour, who knows a great deal about the Islamic world, having been raised in Cairo and being steeped in Islamic culture. Hussein?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sarah. And thank you very much, Harold. It's always a great pleasure to have you. And thank you very much for all our viewers and our audience that he met. And thank you for all those who sent us questions. Please continue to send us your questions either through the chat box or the Q&A button. So, Harold, we received a number of questions. Some of them might be a little bit off topic, but I'm going to ask them regardless. And the first question, I don't know if you know any information about this, which is basically asking you, do you know if the Israeli journalist Gil Tamari decided on his own to do this, or did his TV channel ask him to do this?
Good question. I haven't a clue. But yeah, I know many people who, it's always talk among Middle East, they'd love to go to Mecca. Look at, to me, I can always say, look at me, I managed to do it, and everybody else hasn't. I don't know. You know, I don't know him. I certainly don't know his TV channel, the people who run it. They may, I can't tell you, I don't know.
Do you think, I mean, you already answered this, but I'm going to ask it since it's here. Do you think that such a prank might set back diplomatic cooperation, backing for the Abraham Accords? Aren't they too important to be interrupted by one foolish act?
Well, there's a phrase, I think, that you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's benefiting all sides so well at the moment. There's so many good things that are coming out of it for all sides. But I'm going to commit suicide? No, I doubt it. I think, but again, who am I? I'm just a historian.
So Islamic doctrine has been used, and most people in the West have came to contact with Islamic doctrine only through war and violence, and how Islamic doctrine was used to justify just annihilationist war against Israel, terrorism, and so on. Now that you have the Abraham Accords and the potential of Israeli-Saudi peace, how can such a doctrine that justified war and anti-Semitism for so long, how can they make the switch to peace? Can they truly change their doctrine? How can they do this?
Well, I guess a few answers for this. There's this beautiful four-letter phrase in Arabic proverb, a day of honey, a day of onions. Today I hate your guts, and tomorrow I'm hugging you tightly. Who knows what the next day will bring? Or me against my brother, the two of us against my cousin, and the three of us against the world, and that all can get mixed up too. Again, let's go back to two things. The idea of patience. Muslims know how to wait. It's in my interest at the moment to shut up because I can't do anything about it. Do the Muslims believe, and who am I to talk to you, Hussein, who knows this a billion times better than I? Do they know, whatever that word "know" means, that they will conquer the whole world? Well, it's in the Quran. It's a permanent war between the world of Islam, where the world rules, and the world of war. I'd call it even better being the world of war, permanent war, the world which has not yet become Muslim. Now, does that mean it has to be done in 3 minutes from now? No, it'll happen when it does. And God is the one in control here. So the doctrine is there, but there's also the treaty that Muhammad is supposed to have signed with the Quraysh at that time, his enemies, called Hudaybiyah, which was they signed for 10 years a truce. There's no such thing as peace, put bygones be bygones. But this treaty was for 10 years that there would be a truce among them. Now, Muhammad, what he did was for 2 years, he bided his time, he strengthened himself. And when he decided that he was now strong enough to defeat his enemies, the 10-year treaty ended. That is, Muhammad fought and defeated his enemies. Now, that augurs, but the answer is when Yasser Arafat signed the Oslo Accords, 2 weeks later, he's giving a speech in South Africa in a mosque in which he he refers to this as, he refers to Muhammad's Treaty of Hudaybiyah. That's what I did. I'm biding my time. I know how to wait. The time will come. So that's why Netanyahu's idea of military, economically, and politically, I missed whatever one other, who knows, of being strong. As long as Israel is strong, it doesn't have to worry. If it's come, let us reason together. Come, let us let me, I'll give in to you, or whatever. Giving in the Middle East is a sign of weakness, and Hussein, you know this from your own personal experience a billion times better than I. So maybe that's the answer, maybe.
Thank you, Harold. Harold is very modest. His knowledge is simply
and so are you,
unsurpassable.
and so are you.
We've received a question about the issue of apartheid. Israel is, all the time is accused of being an apartheid state, and here you have Saudi Arabia. We're now facing a potential problem because only one guy, not one non-Muslim, one Jew, drove through the city of Mecca. Isn't this outrageous? Isn't this a double standard that we should point out?
Well, we could call, there are many double standards. For example, in Saudi Arabia, you can't be a Saudi citizen in any of these countries if you're not a Muslim. What about the rest of us in this world? They're not. Why are there laws all over the place which discriminate? I don't think today what was apartheid in South Africa is part of the past. It's absurd. In apartheid Israel, you have Arabs, you have Muslim now, Arab on the Supreme Court. You got, look at the vile vitriol of some of the Arab members of Knesset and what they say. And I could just maybe give you the Jordanian answer to this. I was once sitting in Jordan for many years, even before the peace treaty. They were able to see Israeli TV. There was a Knesset channel, and the Israelis broadcast these awful debates in Hebrew, of course, and screaming and yelling at each other. And these Jordanians, most of whom were East Bankers, who did not know Hebrew. West Bankers, a lot of them did know Hebrew, were just fascinated and glued to the TV. Why were they so glued and interested in this? Because here they saw the Arabs insulting the leaders of Israel, defaming the state and all that. And they said to themselves, oh my God, I wish we had that here. If we dare said that about our leaders, that would be the end. And I can only tell you, when Anwar Sadat came to speak at the Knesset, was it 1979, 77, way back when? I'm getting old. All the past is becoming mushed in my brain. What was interesting is he had two guards who were standing at the side as he spoke. When Sadat spoke in front of the Knesset, there was complete silence. When Menachem Begin, who was the prime minister at the time, got up to speak, and their cat calls and their boos and all sorts of awful things. One of the guards, the Egyptian guards, looked at the other and said, in Arabic to each other, and someone I know was there and heard it, and that's how we know, what is this? And the other guard, number two guard, looked at number one and said, this is democracy. And the first guy said, wow, what else? A beautiful, what a beautiful thing this is. What a very beautiful thing this is. It's, I only wish that eventually in the Muslim world, that they have the ability to do what in this apartheid state of Israel, what the Israelis can do about their government, the protest, screaming, the yelling, and everything. Because, as we know, that isn't the case.
Thank you. Israel is not the only country that is now, in talks about, or people are talking about, a relationship between them and Saudi Arabia. There is another Middle Eastern country that people now are talking about, talks between them and the Saudis, and that's Iran. The Saudis seem to have opened back channels with Iran. They are trying to take next step in diplomatic channels. Can you give us any insights or any comments about Saudi-Iranian relationship?
Well, there was always at a low level, but after what Biden did in the Middle East, and where the Israeli leaders were seemed to be a bit weak, let's say, that when Biden left, all of a sudden is when all these countries are publicly announcing that we're reopening, or we're trying to have good relations with Iran. When they perceive weakness in the Middle East, you need a protector. If, as again to quote Ron Dermer, the reason why they were interested in Israel is if they said if the 800-pound gorilla, meaning the United States, wasn't going to protect, and then maybe the 250-pound gorilla is their next best alternative, that being Israel. Now the question is, if this whole system doesn't work, they got to make arrangements. That's what you got to do. You got to be nice to the people who destroy you, because you hope. It's the way the Jews in Europe were trying to be nice to the rulers all the time. Oh, if I'm nice, everything will be all right. Although you suspect them, and that's exactly what these people, if you'll excuse this, I don't mean this in an offensive way, the Gulfies, the countries in the Gulf, including Saudi Arabia, they're going to survive. They've been there. The Gulfies have been there for almost 6,000 years. I mean that because the archaeology is fascinating what we're finding there. They know how to handle the situation. There's always been, in some level, relations with Iran. But if I can't rely on you, I'm going to look elsewhere.
Can I just back that up? It brings to mind a quote from Osama bin Laden: "If I have a strong horse and a weak horse, I will bet on the strong horse." And it's just survival for them. And it's what Hussein has brought back from his recent trip to the Emirates, where they call it diversification of their portfolio.
Of course.
Yeah, it's survival. Hussein, I'm sorry.
Yeah, we received more questions about the Middle East and about Islam as a religion, so maybe I'm going to go there. Is there anything in Islam that truly justifies the claim that Islam is a religion of peace? As you know, there are always like two sides fighting this conversation. Islam is a religion of jihad, and then a lot of other people, a lot of them are non-Muslims, say no, Islam is a religion of peace. Is there anything truly in the Islamic doctrine that justify peace?
Peace, as we understand it, is a problem. Why? Because peace really means putting bygones be bygones, and I would assume many of your listeners have at least a smattering of Hebrew here. The root for the word shalom in Hebrew, which really is even deeper than the American word peace. It's bygones be bygones. We had problems with each other and all that, but we're putting it behind us, and we're going to walk on this as friends now, as we're buddies. That root shin lamed mem in Hebrew comes from the idea of completeness. The word shalom in Hebrew is to complete. The shalom in Hebrew is to pay. And what is paying? You, let's say, Hussein, you're the merchant. I'm in your store. You hand me what I'm buying. I hand you the money. When I hand you the money, the transaction is over. That is completeness. Now, that's what we want in the West. That's how we understand it. And that's, so many songs about in Israel are about peace, peace, peace. Now, what is the Arabic, which is, again, the Arabic language informs Islam. It is the most important language in Islam. The equivalent root, because Arabic and Hebrew are basically variants of the same ancient language, Proto-Semitic. Arabic is also a root language. So you have the shin is a sin in Arabic, sin lam mim. Now, that root does not have the same associations in Arabic that it does in Hebrew. For example, The word, what is Islam? Islam means submission to the will of God. Now that we all submit, we're supposed to, but in Judaism, you can argue with God, and you do argue with God. That's what the Talmud is all about. But in the end, you must accept his decision, God's decision. From my experience, and saying you are going to know better, from my experience, you don't argue with God. You must just meekly accept his ruling. No fighting. And what is the proof that in Judaism? It's in the Bible. Remember, here's Abraham, the first, the beginning of the Jewish people, and the beginning of all, we're all supposedly in the Middle East descended from Abraham. That's what why the word Abraham, of course. But what's happening here? God has decided that he doesn't like what's going on in Sodom and Gomorrah, and he tells Abraham, "I'm going to destroy the whole city. It's over," because they're doing all these immoral whatever things. What happens? Abraham said, wait a minute, not so quick. Are there 50 righteous people in Sodom? And God now is on the defensive in this discussion. It's all in the Bible. It's all there in the book of Genesis. And God says, no, they're not 50. Are there 45? No. And the number keeps going down and down. They're back to God and Abraham. Are there 5? And it appears from there's sort of a hesitation. God says, there are. You must, Abraham says, take them out. What will people say about you? And God says, and I'm, of course, just giving a modern American, but you got a point there. And that's when Lot and his family are brought out. We have another instances, and I'll just stop with that. Moses, after the golden calf, he comes down, and God said, the hell with these people. They're stiff-necked, they're horrible, whatever like this. I'm going to destroy them all and start a new people from you. And Moses says, you are? No way. He said, go. He said, if you do that, you're proving what a horrible, I'm giving him a nice modern, tafsir, what commentary. On this. We do that. We Jews argue with God. For Muslims, it's hard to do that. If God says there is a permanent war between the world of Islam and the world which is not yet Muslim, there is. How can there be peace? The only answer is that we who are living in the non-Muslim world is we must be strong, and we must understand that then the Muslims know how to wait. Remember, patience is everything. That's how, again, what I mentioned before about Osama bin Laden and Mohammed bin Salman, MBS, what they know how to wait. And so it's not that it's the end of the world. We must be strong. They must know we are prepared to use our strength. If they do that, bang. I can just maybe one other thing. You remember when President Trump took out Qasem Soleimani? All of a sudden, the Iranians are, oh my God, and we're going to get back at them. You notice if you look at the whole nuclear program, they stopped everything for a bit. Why? Because they believe now that Trump was serious. And if you look at what happened in Libya and in Syria and in Iran, when America went into Iraq, they were afraid that we were then going to turn after Iraq. We're going to take care of Iran. We're going to take care of Damascus and Libya as well. And they were also. So I'm not arguing we need to go and send our military all over the place. We have all sorts of other ways of doing things. But it's not, Islam is different. It does not have this concept of peace like we do. But it doesn't matter as long as you are strong. We can handle this. They just have to know we are serious. And then we're all going to get along just fine as a rule.
Thank you for a very elaborate answer. We received a question that it's a little bit technical, but I actually like it, from Yoni Tobin. It's asking you, Dr. Rode, you mentioned earlier or mentioned before that there is the economist paradigm in Islamic thought of Dar al-Harb and Dar al-Islam, the abode of war, of the infidels, and the abode of Islam. However, this paradigm is never truly explicitly mentioned in the Quran or the Hadith, but rather it really emerged in debates over Islamic jurisprudence. It's a later intellectual construct that Islamic jurists came up with. Does this mean that this concept may be contested and done away with time if, let's say the doors of ijtihad are open and Muslims
Hallelujah.
if it's not really deeply rooted in the scripture or not mentioned explicitly in the scripture itself, it's just a later theological construct, can it be contested?
I doubt it, because there are a lot of things that are implied in Islam. If it's a permanent thing, if the jurists decided it was that way, it was that way. You cannot, again, remember, the Sunni world is really where it's at, meaning that the Shiites are, 12, 14%. And, it's never explicitly stated in the Quran that once a land is conquered by Muslims, it's Muslim forever. But everybody in the Middle East, and I know there may be 2 people out of 1.567, whatever it is, billion who think differently. Once a land is Muslim, it's Muslim forever. Now, I can only tell you that Jonathan Tobin's question here is one that in the American government, I'll never forget when we were desperately looking for a fatwa from Iran against nuclear weapons, which no one has ever seen, that the Muslims supposedly can't have it. They talk about it all the time. And then when all of a sudden, when Khomeini died, whom should we support? As if it mattered. And is this, maybe this one, it doesn't matter. Just because even if one Muslim leader or Muslim senior religious leader, highly respected, makes comments, well, this isn't that, this isn't this. It's the story with the poor Gil Tamari. Maybe they can come out and say, well, yeah, I don't imagine they would say this. We're not going to go out and do anything about this. But that doesn't mean that ruling binds other Muslims to follow it. So yeah, maybe someone could say, well, it's not really here and there, but doctrine, as we understand that, it's basically a Catholic concept. Doctrine is something in the West that much more matters. I will pick and choose what I want. To not me, Harold, but that's why, look, the Saudis can say what they want, and if Paul Gil Tamari is traveling in Western Europe and one of the Muslim brothers, I only use that as Muslim brother, it could be anybody. Here's my opportunity. How come we see terrorist events in Israel where no one planned it? The guy is driving somewhere, and all of a sudden there's a group of Jews, and he slams into them. Now, did he plan it? Maybe a billionth of a second before he did it. It doesn't matter. This is Islamic doctrine. Only if the gates, as you said, they had to reopen the gates of independent and critical thought, could there possibly that. But it wouldn't be binding on everybody else, because you saying, and you're the type who could do it. You open the gates of ijtihad, of independent and critical thought, to re-examine all this. No, you accept this, and maybe a lot of people do, but what do you do about all those people who don't accept it? Problem, because you have no control over them. There is no Pope-like figure in Islam who can decide for everybody, and even the Pope, it seems, can't decide for Catholics today, for what everybody's going to do and say.
Thank you very much, Harold. And I'm going to ask the final question, the last question. I want to apologize to all our viewers who sent us questions, but we're running out of time and we're not going to be able to get out of them. And the last question is about the Palestinians. If the Saudis sign a peace treaty with Israel, does it mean that they are abandoning their moral and religious commitment to the Palestinian cause? And I'm going to compound it with another question. And why can't the Palestinian think in the same pragmatic terms, the Palestinians?
Well, this is a wonderful question. Let's take the first part. The intellectual godfather of the Saudis is a man by the name, or was in the late 1200s, early 1300s, Ibn Taymiyyah. Now, Ibn Taymiyyah, when he's the intellectual godfather, Abdul Wahhab, the guy who basically found Wahhabism in Saudi Arabia, which is in the 1700s, that was his intellectual godfather. And one thing, and by the way, it's very important, Ibn Taymiyyah hated the Jews. It becomes important. Why? Because if you read his writings, and he's brilliant, the man, and he writes about Jerusalem. He hated Jerusalem. He said there are only two holy cities in Islam, Mecca and Medina, and he proved, using totally Islamic sources, that Jerusalem is nothing more than Tawhid, the Judaification of Islam. This is the city. Everything else is absurd. Jerusalem, therefore, is not holy to the Muslims. Now the Saudis. Now I said, no one was really going to go on the news or TV or anything like that and say anything to oppose something the Saudi government that's oppose anything the Saudi government is doing. Now, if you notice, especially in the last few years, what you have all these, you have a whole series of Saudi journalists and social media activists and all that, who are saying that Masjid al-Aqsa, the furthest mosque, is not Jerusalem. This is nothing more than bid'ah. This is innovation, which is forbidden in Islam. What it is that place is about 23, I think it's called Jarana or something to that. I can't remember the name, but that is where the furthest mosque is. They all explain that, and what it is this has always been part of what of Wahhabism. They've always hated Jerusalem, but it never came out because they felt weak, and that other people had to come first and say and do whatever. But the fact that the Saudis are allowing their people, their bloggers, their journalists, whatever, to talk against Jerusalem is in essence throwing down, you can't, Jerusalem is not ours. Now there's also all these traditions within Islam about the Bani Israel. It's in the Quran galore. Who are they? The children of Israel. And that you can make excellent arguments in the Quran that this land belongs to the Jews because God said so. That is using the Quran to prove the opposite argument, shall we say, that we mostly hear. Now, so the Saudis, they never really, they don't want to be involved in anything to do with the Jordanians. Now remember, the Jordanians are a problem for the Saudis. Why? Because they're the Hashemites. The Hashemites ruled Mecca, and the Saudis are the Johnny-come-latelys, backwater people who took it over in the early 20s. And the rightful rulers, the Hashemites, they don't say it because it's not in their interest. The Hashemites are supposed to rule Mecca. They did for 1,000 years. So if the Jordanians want to get involved in Jerusalem, do all that, let them worry. I don't want to have anything to do with it. And if Jerusalem were so holy, why, when King Abdullah I and King Hussein, why didn't they move the capital of Jordan from Amman to Jerusalem? Obviously, it wasn't all that important, or they would have done it. Ron Dermer, again, I think it's probably the third time I'm going to quote this. If this is supposed to be the third most holy city in Islam, Jerusalem, well, imagine it's like your third most favorite ice cream flavor, Ron used to say. Who knows what his third most? It doesn't mean anything. Now, on the Palestinians, the people that are oppressing the Palestinians are the leaders that the West and Israel, I almost want to say, chose to deal with. Yasser Arafat was a murderer of Palestinians. Mahmoud Abbas, the guy who was the dictator of the Palestinian Authority, who his family, by the way, is from Tzfat, from Safed in northern Israel today. And there was an important Jewish religious family in Safed from about 1600s on. And guess what his family name was? Abbasi. And there are rumors galore that he is in fact of Jewish origin. There's the whole story behind it. It's known. I've heard this among the. Who are these people? I mean, they were oppressing the Palestinians. If you want what I really think is, it's somehow, I would call it a one-state solution. That there are a series of cantons. The idea is Mordechai Kedar is really a great scholar of the Islamic world in Israel. The people of Jenin can't stand the people of Nablus. They don't intermarry, God forbid. They marry east-west. They marry Irvid, the people of Jenin. They marry in Irvid, which is northwestern Jordan, and traditionally they intermarried with Nazareth. These were trade families. Hebron in the south, and a place called Tafila, which is not far from Petra, in Jordan, and El Karak. These are completely intermarried. This is the normal things. They don't see themselves as one people. If they had their own cantons, they could manage the affairs internally. That's what Yitzhak Rabin, the great Yitzhak Rabin, who everybody touts as this peace winner. He, in his last day, the day before, he was debating whether he should even have gone to that rally where he was killed, because he saw the whole thing was a sham, the Oslo agreements, and he was very much considering abandoning it. That's not my idea. People who are very, very close to him have said this publicly in the intervening years. Again, it's far-fetched, but far afield, but it's all part of the same story.
Thank you so much. I could listen, and I'm sure our audience could listen to you forever, Harold, for your years and years of accumulated wisdom and knowledge about the Muslim and Arab world, and what we continuously and perpetually seem to get wrong, and all of the mythology and projection of our own values. One of my favorite quotes is Margaret Thatcher, who used to say, "We in the West make a great mistake when we transform our values onto the rest of the world." So I think it's important to try to really appreciate where they're coming from. You know, if Israel is going to live in that neighborhood, that very tough neighborhood, and if America is going to try to survive this power projection, we need to understand and appreciate just where they're coming from, sociologically, philosophically, and theologically. So you've contributed a tremendous amount, Harold Rode.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for that.
Can I only say, I'm going to quote Bernard Lewis in the end, who to me was the greatest Middle Eastern scholar alive, certainly, whatever. Bernard used to say, one does what one can. In other words, I'm doing my best, that's all. I'm trying.
Yes, yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Well, okay, and we will see our audience next Thursday, August 4th, when we will have Emmanuel Ottolenghi from the wonderful Foundation for Defense of Democracies, who will talk about some incredibly brazen events going on, Hezbollah in Latin America. Thank you so much.